Was it Professor Plum with a gun in the dining room? Mrs. Peacock with a knife in the conservatory?
What?
Mr. Green with a pipe in the billiard room? Mrs. White with a rope in the library? Colonel Mustard with a wrench in the kitchen? Miss Scarlet with a candlestick in the ballroom? Or did the butler do it?
No.
It's a comedy with 3 different endings. Who done it depends on where you see it. Rated PG. Now playing at a theater near you.
Hello, divers. Coming to you from Studio D, the Deep Dive Podcast proudly presents Hollywood Hype, a series that looks at the gimmicks, tie-ins, and publicity stunts that lured unsuspecting patrons into movie theaters. I'm Tom Feeney, 2-time Emmy Award-winning producer and writer for Wang's Chop Movie Magazine. Here we are, back in the saddle and ready to move on with Season 7 of the Deep Dive Podcast. Now, there are many podcasts who use the same name, but this is the only one you are listening to right now. Congratulations. Shall we begin? Back in December of 1985, a film was released into theaters across America that, depending upon which theater you went to, had one of 3 different endings. A clever gimmick, to be sure, but it didn't do much for its box office returns. But later, when it was released on home video, the movie Clue, based on the popular Parker Brothers board game, began its mysterious journey to becoming a beloved comedy classic. On this edition of Hollywood Hype, how the game became the movie, and how the movie became a cult favorite. But before we get to the film itself, let's look back at its inspiration. Clue, originally called Cluedo, and it still is in fact in the UK, was invented in 1943 by English musician and factory worker Anthony E. Pratt. Living in Birmingham, England, Pratt created the game as a form of murder mystery entertainment inspired by classic detective fiction from authors like Agatha Christie.
A detective has to be observant, cautious, and cool. When you play Clue, you have to figure out who did it. There are suspects, weapons, and scenes for a crime.
Mr. Green did it in the study with a knife.
I got a clue card.
I know. It was Miss Scarlet in the conservatory with a candlestick. Wow! Elementary, my dear Betsy.
Clue from Parker Brothers.
The game was designed to simulate a thrilling whodunit where players would work to deduce the suspect, weapon, and location of a murder. He filed a patent for the game in 1944 under the name Cluedo, a combination of Clue and Ludo. Now, for those who don't know, and I sure didn't until I looked it up, Ludo is the name of a traditional British board game. You might recognize it by its American name, Parcheesi. Now, due to restrictions during World War II, the game wouldn't be published until 1949. The British company Waddingtons published Cluedo in the UK, and board game giant Parker Brothers acquired the US rights, renaming it Clue for American audiences. The game's distinctive lineup of characters like Miss Scarlet, Professor Plum, and Colonel Mustard quickly became iconic, as did the setting of an English mansion and the selection of several potential murder weapons. Clue became a major hit, and over the years, Hasbro, which acquired Parker Brothers, has introduced numerous variations of the game, including themed editions, junior versions, and electronic adaptations. In 1985, the same year the feature film was released, a new kind of Clue was making its way onto store shelves. This version was a bit more high-tech. In order to play it, you needed one of those newfangled video cassette recorders or VCRs.
The only thing better than watching a good whodunit is being part of one. Now you can with Parker Brothers Clue VCR, an ingenious new concept in games. Watch and collect evidence. Who killed whom? Where? And with what? You and your friends will find a new mystery every time you play Clue VCR. But beware! Solving it could be absolute murder.
Clue VCR Mystery Game, wherever games are sold.
The Clue VCR Mystery Game was one of the first of its kind. The game came with a 60-minute VHS tape, sorry Betamax fans, that contained 3 separate stories all performed by live actors. The game included 4 new suspects, including Miss Peach, Sergeant Grey, Madame Rose, and Monsieur Brunette. The game was a big success, and a sequel, Clue 2, Murder in Disguise, featuring the same cast, was released in 1987.
First in Paris, then in Tangiers, then again in Rangoon. Now, if I didn't know better, I'd swear someone was trying to do me in the new Clue 2 game. New Clue 2 and the original Clue, 2 exciting ways to play Clue, both on VCR. And for more excitement, let's go to the races. Let's go to the races, a VCR game with everything for hours of fun. VCR games, Clue 2, original Clue, and let's go to the races.
There's even a short documentary called Who Did It about the making of the VCR games. That can be found on YouTube. Oh, and actually so can the live-action scenes from the Clue VCR games, if you want to watch them. And yes, for those who grew up a generation later, there was in fact a Clue DVD game, for you 90s kids. This version featured computer-generated characters instead of live actors. That one has 10 different mysteries to solve. Now, that version of the game was very well received and is considered to be one of the best of its genre. Now, what about video games? Well, yes, there were quite a few. Clue Master Detective was released by Virgin Games back in 1989 for Apple, Atari, Commodore, and Microsoft computers. A few years later, a version of the board game was published for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and the Sega Genesis home video game consoles. Most recently, a new version of Clue has been added to the popular gaming platform Steam and getting positive reviews. But guess what didn't get a lot of positive reviews?
Every person in this room has the perfect motive.
Stand back!
For murder.
What do you mean? Murder.
But only one of these suspects is the murderer. Is it the timid Mr. Green?
Why are you screaming? Because I'm frightened of what? Screaming!
Or the militant Colonel Mustard?
If I was the killer, I would kill you next.
Huh?
Except F.
Mrs. White, who helped her husband on his way?
Well, it's a matter of life after death. Now that he's dead, I have a life.
Miss Scarlet, who's helped many men along the way?
Practice makes perfect.
Professor Plum, who's looking for a way?
I'm looking.
Mrs. Peacock?
I have absolutely no idea what we're doing here, but I am determined to enjoy myself.
Or did the butler do it?
No.
Paramount Pictures invites you to an evening of mystery.
Let us in! Let us in! Let us out! Let us out!
Murder.
This is getting quite serious.
And madness. In the movie that makes a scene of the crime.
So who did it?
Clue. It's not just a game anymore.
Yes, a film that today is considered a cult comedy classic barely made a dent in box office returns during its initial 1985 theatrical release. In fact, Clue wasn't even able to make back its original investment, only grossing a total of $14.6 million against a budget of $15 million. This despite being based on a well-known and loved board game property, having an incredibly talented cast, and yes, a very unique and marketable gimmick. Now, I am of course talking about the decision to have 3 separate endings to the film. Now, if you watch the film today on streaming or any other medium, all 3 endings are part of the viewing experience. But when it was released theatrically, it was a crapshoot as to which ending you were going to get. Well, mostly anyway. You see, back in the before times, when theaters advertised showtimes in something we used to call newspapers, you would check the listings to see which theater was screening different movies. Now, in the case of Clue, each individual theater got one of the 3 different endings. These endings were marked A, B, and C. You had to choose which ending you wanted to see without knowing what that ending was. Before the days of the internet and social media, there was no easy way of finding out which ending A, B, or C actually were. Now, ideally, and the producers hoped, that would lead to people to go see all 3 endings in different theaters. Well, what it really did was confuse potential ticket buyers. It didn't help that other 1985 holiday movie releases included films like The Color Purple, Rocky IV, Out of Africa, and Santa Claus the Movie. Okay, maybe that last one doesn't really count. Ugh. It seemed after its lackluster box office run, Clue would be relegated to the dustbin of cinematic history. But then, something odd happened. Something that even the most hardcore mystery buff couldn't have detected. Clue started to gather a following. Clue was released on home video in 1986, where it gained a second life. Of course, having all 3 endings included was essential. I mean, can you imagine video stores of the day having to stock 3 different versions of the same video cassette on the shelves? No, wasn't going to happen. Also, Clue began running on cable television and also broadcast TV. A lot. See, it was a solid choice to fill airtime. Clue had no swearing, no nudity, no blood. It could run anytime on any channel, virtually uncut. And run it did. New generations were discovering the film and became obsessed with it. Midnight screenings became popular with audiences, acting out the film on the screen like another classic cult movie with Tim Curry, The Rocky Horror Picture Show. Clue's cult status shows no signs of slowing down either. There have been stage adaptations, both as a play and a Broadway musical. Now, aside from the musical numbers, the main difference between the two is, well, the stage play is based on the 1985 film, but the musical is a brand new adaptation of the board game. Oh, there's another important difference as well. The play was well received. The musical was most certainly not. Now, that reminds me, why with the current resurgence in popularity of the film, why hasn't Hollywood just tried to ruin it with a remake? Well, just be patient. There have been many people with many plans over the last 20 years trying to get a remake off the ground. Universal Studios tried. 20th Century Fox tried. Ryan Reynolds tried. But as of right now, the rights holder, toy company Hasbro, is shopping around for a new studio to produce a new Clue. Of course, with the recent success of Knives Out films by Rian Johnson, it feels like an inevitability that we will see a new murderous ensemble try to figure out who done it. As for me, I shall remain Mr. Feeney in the studio with a microphone. Thanks for listening. If this is the first time you've heard this podcast, check out our past episodes, available on almost all podcast providers, and subscribe so you don't miss a single one. If you like what you hear, write us a review. We'd love to know what you think. Or drop us a line at thedeepdivepodcast@gmail.com. All clips used in this podcast are meant for educational purposes only and not to infringe on existing copyrights. Hollywood Hype is part of the Deep Dive Podcast family and a production of Automaton Studios.